Hidden deep within the wooded hills of Pilot Knob in Kentucky, a cemetery exists that many locals believe is the most haunted in the state. Known as Pilot Knob Cemetery, this eerie resting place is far more than just a burial ground. It's a site where the living fear to tread and the dead refuse to rest. Nestled between towering trees and surrounded by a chilling fog, the cemetery is isolated, hidden away from the main roads, as if intentionally forgotten by time itself. But there is one thing that no one can forget: the terrifying stories that surround this place. The first known burial in Pilot Knob Cemetery occurred in the early 1800s, and ever since, locals have whispered tales of strange happenings. People who have visited the cemetery at night have reported hearing strange sounds, whispers on the wind, footsteps that echo in the distance. But when you turn around, there's no one there. Some say they have felt a cold breath on the back of their necks, while others have seen shadowy figures moving between the gravestones. Yet when the sun rises, no evidence is left, just a lingering sense of unease. One of the most famous stories surrounding Pilot Knob Cemetery is the tale of a woman in black. For years, locals have claimed to see her walking along the cemetery's winding paths, her face obscured by a veil of dark fabric, her footsteps barely audible. Some say she is the spirit of a young woman who died tragically at a young age, while others believe she is a tormented soul, forever bound to the graveyard, unable to move on. But it's not just the woman in black that haunts the cemetery. In fact, many claim that Pilot Knob has a dark energy that clings to anyone who dares to visit. Those brave enough to spend the night there often report feeling watched, even when there's no one around. The cemetery is notorious for its unnerving atmosphere, where every rustle of the leaves or crack of a branch sounds like something much more sinister lurking just out of sight. The true horror, however, lies in the fact that no one has been able to uncover the truth behind the eerie happenings at Pilot Knob Cemetery. Could it be that the restless spirits of the cemetery's past are still trapped between the living world and the afterlife? Or is there something darker lurking beneath the soil, something ancient that should have never been disturbed? As the evening descended over Pilot Knob Cemetery, a thick fog began to settle over the graveyard, obscuring the path ahead. The trees surrounding the cemetery swayed eerily in the wind, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the gravestones. Jacob stood at the edge of the cemetery, heart pounding in his chest, a mix of curiosity and dread coursing through him. His footsteps were the only sound breaking the oppressive silence, and with each step, he felt a deeper sense of unease. He had heard the stories. Everyone had. The locals whispered about the cemetery late at night, stories of vanishing figures, unseen forces, and eerie lights that glowed faintly over the graves. But until now, Jacob had never believed in such things. He had always dismissed the supernatural tales as just that, tales. That was until his visit to the cemetery tonight. As he ventured deeper into the graveyard, the air grew heavier, the temperature dropped, and an unnatural stillness enveloped him. Jacob pulled his jacket tighter around him, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But the more he walked, the stronger the sensation grew. He looked around, but there was nothing. No people, no animals, just the cold graves and the whispers of the wind. His mind raced back to the legend of the woman in black. Local lore had it that she was seen often, especially near the old mausoleum at the far end of the cemetery. She was said to walk between the gravestones, slowly as if in mourning, her black dress flowing behind her like a shadow, and her face always hidden beneath a veil. But Jacob was skeptical. He had been raised to believe in logic, in science, not in ghost stories. But then something caught his eye, a glimmer of light in the distance. It was faint at first, barely visible through the fog, but it grew stronger as he took a few more steps. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the moonlight. It wasn't a trick of his mind. It was a glowing orb, floating just above the ground, casting an eerie light on the gravestones surrounding it. With caution, Jacob stepped closer, his heart racing. The orb flickered like a distant star, floating between the graves and weaving its way through the cemetery. Jacob stopped in his tracks, unsure of what he was witnessing. His logical mind told him it had to be some sort of reflection, but the sensation in his gut told him otherwise. There was something unnatural about this light, something otherworldly. As Jacob approached the orb, it began to move, slowly, almost purposefully, as if leading him somewhere. It floated toward a particular gravestone, stopping in front of it as if beckoning him closer. The stone was old, worn, with no clear inscription. It looked almost forgotten, abandoned to time, but there was something about it that felt different, as if it were calling out to him. Jacob's curiosity overcame his fear. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold stone. The moment he touched it, the orb disappeared, vanishing into the air like a dream fading with the dawn. Jacob stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. The cemetery was eerily silent again, but something had changed. The air felt heavier, the weight of the atmosphere more oppressive than before. Then he heard it, a whisper, soft at first, like a faint breeze. It was just barely audible, but it came from somewhere close. Jacob spun around, his pulse racing, but there was no one there, no one in sight. The voice spoke again, but this time, the words were clearer. "You should not have come." Jacob's heart nearly stopped. The whisper had come from behind him, as if someone or something was standing just a few feet away. He turned quickly, but the cemetery was still empty, save for the old graves and tombstones. The voice came again, louder this time, almost urgent. "Leave now. The curse is real." Jacob's mind raced. The stories he had heard, the whispers, the strange lights, everything was lining up. There was no denying it anymore. The cemetery wasn't just haunted by the memories of the dead. It was haunted by something much darker, something ancient that did not want to be disturbed. Panic began to set in. Jacob wanted to run, to leave the cemetery and never come back, but he couldn't tear himself away. Something held him here, something that felt like it had been waiting for him. He didn't know if it was the curse or if it was the cemetery itself, but he knew one thing for sure. He was not alone. And in that moment, Jacob realized that the curse was not just a legend. It was real, and it was calling him. Jacob's breath quickened as he stood motionless, every fiber of his being screaming for him to run. But his legs refused to obey, rooted to the spot as if the cemetery itself had claimed him. The whispers, once soft and distant, were now growing louder, almost as if the air itself was alive with their presence. He could feel their weight, their pressure, as if the voices of the dead surrounded him, each one pressing in on him from every direction. He strained his eyes, searching through the fog, but saw nothing. The cemetery, which had felt empty just moments ago, now felt alive, as though every grave, every tombstone was a silent witness to his presence. The temperature dropped sharply, and Jacob's breath came out in visible clouds, the chill biting at his skin. It was unnatural. The cold wasn't the kind of crisp air you might expect on a late autumn evening. This was different, unnerving, like something from another realm had seeped into the land. His mind raced. What was this? What had he uncovered in this place? Was the cemetery haunted as the locals had claimed? Or was there something darker at work here? Something that the stories hadn't prepared him for? The whispers grew more frantic now, echoing through the air like a chorus of voices, speaking in unison. "You're here to understand. You're here to break it." Jacob stumbled back a few steps, his heart pounding in his chest. But no matter how far he moved, the voices were everywhere. He could feel them pulling at him, tugging at his very soul. They weren't just words. They were demands, commands to uncover something that Jacob couldn't even fathom. Suddenly, he felt a cold hand press lightly against his shoulder. It was so real that for a moment, Jacob wondered if someone had snuck up behind him. He spun around, heart hammering, but there was no one there. The graveyard was still empty, silent, except for the voices that seemed to be closer now, almost within reach. "You shouldn't have come, Jacob." The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't from the wind. It was close, far too close. It felt as if the voice were coming directly from behind him, breathing down his neck. Jacob's pulse raced as his mind scrambled for a way to escape this place, but the presence around him was suffocating. The fog seemed to grow thicker with every passing second, closing in on him like an impenetrable wall. And then, from the corner of his eye, something moved. He whipped his head to the side, his breath catching in his throat. Through the mist, he could just make out the vague outline of a figure standing at the edge of the cemetery. It was tall, impossibly so, its form distorted by the fog. For a moment, Jacob thought it was a trick of his mind, but as the figure stepped closer, the chill in the air intensified, and the voices grew silent, replaced by a low, ominous hum that vibrated in the very air around him. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, and Jacob could feel his body growing colder, his movements slower. It was the woman in black. He could tell by the silhouette, the long, flowing dress, the veil that hung low over her face, obscuring her features. Yet somehow, even in her quiet, deliberate approach, there was an overwhelming presence that made his skin crawl. "You are not meant to be here, Jacob." Her voice was like ice, calm, but it struck fear into his heart. Jacob's legs felt weak, but he didn't run. Instead, he found himself compelled to take a step forward, as though some force in the ground was pulling him toward her, drawing him closer to the dark truth of the cemetery. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, but he could not resist. The woman in black raised her hand, her long, slender fingers pointing toward one of the old graves, long forgotten and overgrown. Jacob followed the motion, his eyes drawn unwillingly to the site she indicated. He saw an old stone, worn and cracked, and there a faint glow emanated from the grave. The figure spoke again, her voice softer this time, almost compassionate. "Do you see? This is where the curse began. You must understand the past to stop what is happening now." Jacob took a step toward the grave, his heart racing. What did she mean? What was he supposed to see? As he neared the grave, the fog seemed to part, and the ground beneath him trembled slightly. The glow grew brighter. For the first time since he'd stepped into the cemetery, he felt a strange pull, an undeniable connection to this particular grave. He knelt down and, with trembling hands, began to brush away the overgrown moss that had accumulated over the years. As he did, the glow grew stronger until the earth beneath his fingertips felt almost alive. And then, with a single touch, Jacob uncovered something unexpected. A small, tarnished metal object, an old worn locket, nearly buried in the earth, its edges faded by time. As he held it up, the fog lifted, and a sudden silence blanketed the cemetery. The voices stopped. The air cleared. The woman in black, along with the shadows, seemed to dissolve into nothingness. For a moment, Jacob sat in the stunned silence, the locket heavy in his hands. But as the last remnants of the fog disappeared, he knew he had uncovered something significant, something that had been hidden for years. Jacob stood up slowly, the locket still clutched tightly in his hand. He felt a sudden weight settle on his chest as though he had just uncovered something far more dangerous than he had imagined. The quiet that had followed the vanishing of the fog was unsettling, far too still for a place that had been so alive with energy moments ago. The cemetery felt almost too empty, as if it were waiting for something, something that had yet to happen. His eyes scanned the graveyard, where the tombstones seemed to tower over him, their weathered surfaces marked with time. The voices, the figure of the woman in black, and the eerie lights, all of it had led him here, to this single grave, to this single moment. As he held the locket in his hand, it began to grow warmer, the energy around him pulsing with a strange vibrancy. He could feel the weight of something ancient pressing down on him, a force tied to the land that he had only begun to understand. And as the locket began to glow faintly, he couldn't help but wonder if he had stumbled upon a long-buried secret, one that had been concealed for centuries. Suddenly, the silence was broken again, this time by a low, almost imperceptible growl coming from behind him. Jacob spun around, his heart racing, but there was no one there. The cemetery was empty once more. The fog, which had seemingly cleared, now seemed to swirl and gather once again in the distance. Then the ground beneath Jacob's feet shifted slightly, and he felt a cold gust of wind rush through the trees. The shadows that had once receded now crept back toward him, moving unnaturally in the still air. The earth beneath him felt alive, pulsing with something that was not natural. He could feel it. The land, the very soil itself, seemed to want him to understand. The voices, the growl, the shadows, they were all trying to guide him, push him toward an answer, to reveal a truth that he was not prepared for. With his heart still pounding in his chest, Jacob took a cautious step forward, the locket growing warmer in his hand. He couldn't explain why, but he knew. It was the key to unraveling the mystery of Pilot Knob Cemetery. And yet, as he stepped closer to the grave, he heard the softest whisper, almost as though the earth itself was speaking directly to him. "Open it." Jacob hesitated. He didn't want to know what lay within the locket, didn't want to open a door that might never close again, but he had no choice. The cemetery, the voices, the presence that lingered in the air, all of it was pulling him forward, urging him to take that final step. With shaking hands, he opened the locket, and as it clicked open, the air around him seemed to grow heavier. A flash of light shot from the locket, and Jacob stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance. He fell to the ground, eyes wide, heart racing. Inside the locket was a small, faded photograph, the image of a man and a woman standing together, their faces barely visible under the layer of dirt and grime. The photograph was old, its edges worn, but something about the faces caught Jacob's attention. They weren't like the faces of people from his time. They looked out of place, as if they didn't belong in this world at all. And then as he stared at the photograph, something shifted. The air grew denser, and the sound of footsteps began to echo in the distance, slowly growing louder. Jacob's breath hitched in his throat. Someone, or something, was coming. The figure he had seen earlier, the woman in black, was no longer just a ghostly presence. It was real, and it was closing in on him. Suddenly, the photograph flashed again, and Jacob was no longer standing alone in the cemetery. He found himself surrounded by fog, the gravestones now looming like giant sentinels around him. The woman in black was now standing before him, her face hidden, but her presence unmistakable. Jacob could feel the weight of her gaze even though he could not see her eyes. "You were meant to uncover it." Her voice was a whisper, but it reverberated through the cemetery like a thunderclap, deep and echoing. "The curse is bound to you now. The land calls to you. You have opened the door, and there is no going back." Jacob could feel his heart thudding wildly in his chest as he tried to take a step back. The air around him seemed to pulse, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The shadows were closing in, and the voices of the long dead grew louder, more frantic. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. The moment he had opened that locket, he had unleashed something, something that had been waiting, buried deep within the soil of Pilot Knob Cemetery for centuries. Now Jacob's only choice was whether he would confront the curse or if he would allow it to claim him as it had claimed so many others before him. Jacob stood in the midst of the cemetery, his pulse pounding in his ears. The fog swirled around him, thick and suffocating. He could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was part of the curse that had haunted this land for centuries. The woman in black stood motionless before him, her form shrouded in shadow, her presence more oppressive than the darkness itself. Her voice, a soft, haunting whisper, still echoed in his mind. "You have opened the door, Jacob." Her words were not a warning but a decree, one that he could not ignore. The ground beneath his feet felt like it was shifting, pulsing with a life of its own, as if it were alive and breathing. The graveyard itself seemed to close in around him, the gravestones becoming more like sentinels, their faces twisted with pain. Jacob could feel the curse tightening its grip around him, the weight of its power pulling him deeper into the mystery of Pilot Knob Cemetery. His heart raced in his chest, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Every instinct within him screamed to run, to leave this place and never return. But something stopped him. The locket in his hand grew even warmer, almost hot, like it was alive with some ancient energy. The figure of the woman in black moved toward him, her black veil fluttering in the wind, her presence growing more intense with every step. Jacob wanted to look away, but he couldn't. The woman's eyes, though hidden, felt like they were piercing through him, weighing his soul, as though she could see his every fear, his every doubt. She was beyond death, a manifestation of something so ancient and powerful that it could not be understood by human minds. The curse was never meant to be broken. Her voice was like soft wind, but it carried the weight of eternity. "But you, Jacob, You are bound to it now. There is no turning back. You will carry this burden, just as your family did before you. Jacob's hand clenched around the locket. The glowing image of the photograph inside the locket, the man and woman, had come back to him, as if they were the key to understanding it all. He realized that the woman in black was the same person in the photograph, the woman who had once lived, once loved, and once died tragically. She was not a spirit of the cemetery, but something more, a guardian of the curse, bound to the cemetery forever, forced to remain there for eternity. But Jacob couldn't bring himself to believe that. He couldn't accept that this place, this cemetery, had the power to control his fate, to trap him in its endless cycle of death and fear. The woman in black reached out, her cold hand brushing against his face. For a moment, Jacob felt his body go cold, like all warmth and life was being drained from him. His heart began to slow, his vision darkening. He could feel the power of the curse claiming him, its cold tendrils wrapping around his soul, suffocating him with its weight. Then, just as the darkness began to close in, something inside him snapped. The locket in his hand began to glow even brighter, its energy surging, pushing back against the shadow of the cemetery, against the power that had haunted this land for centuries. The woman in black staggered back, as if the light from the locket was burning her, the curse weakening in the presence of its light. Jacob's hand clenched tighter around the locket as he realized the truth. He could break the curse. It wasn't about running from it or hiding from the spirits that roam this place. It was about facing it head on. The locket had the power to banish the spirits, to lift the curse that had kept them tied to this land. But it would come at a cost. He looked at the woman in black one final time. You've had your revenge. Now, it's time to set them free. The woman in black let out a mournful wail as the light from the locket grew brighter, the power of the curse dissipating with each passing second. The shadows that had gathered around the cemetery began to recede, and the fog that had once surrounded the graves lifted, revealing the first true light that had touched this place in years. With a final screech, the woman in black vanished into the air, and the gravestones around Jacob trembled. The curse, centuries old, had finally been broken. The voices, the whispers, the shadows, all were gone. Jacob stood alone in the now peaceful cemetery, the weight of the lifetime of suffering lifted from his shoulders. As the fog cleared, he could see the sun beginning to rise in the distance, casting a warm glow over the graves. The cemetery, once a place of death and despair, was now silent and still, as if the spirits had finally found their rest. Jacob took a deep breath, the first breath of freedom he had taken since entering the cemetery. He knew that he had set things right. He had freed his family and all those who had suffered in Pilot Knob Cemetery. But as he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that the curse was never truly gone. Something told him that Pilot Knob Cemetery would always be haunted, its secrets buried deep beneath the earth, waiting for someone to uncover them once again.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.